Welcome to the Movement Upgraded podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Jen Hosler, licensed physical therapist and certified strength and mobility coach. Here you can expect to hear about all things movement. The Movement Upgraded podcast is a blend of the science of strength training, rehab, and mobility, mixed with the personal and professional experience to provide you with the steps you need to keep your body pain-free and moving well, so you can do what you love forever. Welcome to the Movement Upgraded podcast. We're in episode 7 already. This is the second episode in a 2-episode podcast series that we are doing covering stress and pain. So if you have not listened to episode number 6, you're going to want to make sure that you cover that. It's a prerequisite for this episode. It really sets the scene in making sure we are all on the same page and understanding what we need to understand before I move into the bulk of how to address experiencing a lot of stress and those physical manifestations in our bodies. So go back and listen to that if you have not. Also make sure you listen to the end. We go through a piece of homework that you can check out and make sure that you apply to your life before you listen to this or after this. It doesn't really matter. It's just something that you can start to pay attention to. We're going to build on that in this episode. So you might want to make sure that you have a little notepad and a pen nearby. If you want to jot some things down, it might be helpful. But I'm going to give you a little homework assignment again towards the end of this podcast. So we are definitely going to cover some things that are going to be very actionable for you today. Hopefully that's my goal. With that being said, we are going to want to make sure that before jumping into all of the action steps, I want to make sure that we understand that stress is not bad. In fact, stress is actually really helpful, really important, and necessary for us to thrive. So sometimes I think I think of everything as a pendulum swinging from one side to the other into those extremes. There are people who are like, stress is bad for you. It's everything. It's causing all of your health problems. And then there's the other people who are like, stress is so good for you. The body's adaptable. Just push yourself and make sure you're exposing yourself to lots of stress. In the middle is where I live for most things and for stress too. Stress is really important and it is what helps us become better when we recover from it adequately. And you'll notice that I'll kind of parallel physical stress, our loading our bodies with strength training or the loads we experience with just running or squatting or things like that, and emotional or life stress, which they parallel, they're very related, and I just love the way that they kind of interconnect. And so I talk about that. That's my practice and that's what I do. So we're covering that a lot today. So we really want to understand that without stress, not only are we just going to stay the same, we actually regress. So we kind of disintegrate. Our muscles, if they're not stressed, will start to go away and shrivel. Our bones become really weak. Our comfort zones actually start to shrink, and things that normally didn't bother us would bother us more. Our tolerance in general just kind of gets lower and lower. But with stress and adequate recovery, we can boost those things. So it's not a matter of you need to avoid all stress. Stress is really good and can be viewed as very beneficial for us. If you've gone and done anything in your life that was super stressful, for me, one of the biggest, most stressful things ever was taking my boards exam and going through physical therapy school. They're both very stressful events. But after they were accomplished, the amount of skills that I learned and just the general feeling of accomplishing that was really beneficial for me, and it really made me level up in a lot of different ways in my life. So there are going to be things in your life that are going to be very stressful, and how you recover and cope from those things is going to be really important. So keep that in mind. Your mindset about stress is really important, because if you think all stress is bad, then how you view stress will affect how your body responds to it. So if you're already thinking stress is bad, I hate stress, I don't really like being stressed out, you're kind of adding to the effects of stress, and you're stressing yourself out about stress, and that just compounds and is not as helpful. So keep in mind that it's not that stress is bad, it's when it's unchecked and we are not coping or recovering from it adequately that it can become problematic. With that being said, I want you to think about your in your body, how our bodies respond to stress. So we talked about this last episode. I talked a lot about how stress can create a sense of or a lack of safety in your body, and the opposite of stress would be like activating more of your parasympathetic nervous system, which would mean we are feeling more safety in our body. So the way that I usually like break this down and make it super simple is when we are very stressed and not coping really well, we get into a state of upregulation. So everything becomes more sensitive, we are more alert, and in general, when we are very upregulated, we are going to experience more pain. Our pain threshold lowers, and so it's easier for us to feel pain. The opposite is true when we are really downregulated and chilled out and have a lot of good parasympathetic activity. We are going to feel like we are less stressful. We're not sitting there searching for things. We're less alert. We are going to feel like we are really calm, and we are going to recover from things very well. It's a repair time for our bodies. It's a repair time for our nervous systems, just like a very chill type of mode. That is downregulated versus upregulated again, is that like extreme stress type of situation. There are certain things that we do throughout the day that are going to upregulate our nervous system, and there are certain things we do throughout the day that are going to downregulate our nervous system. In the last episode, I walked through a typical day, and you saw how many upregulators we have all day long and how little we downregulate. And this is something that I wish we were taught or learned throughout our lives, but not all of us were lucky enough to learn or were taught these things. And so this is why it becomes really important as adults to learn how to downregulate your nervous system. So things that are typically upregulators, we're going to list them today. So you may want to take out a notepad or just kind of mentally check off these things in your head. But things that can upregulate our nervous system, this is making it more sensitive, making us be more likely to feel more pain, are going to be things like caffeine that just stimulates your nervous system. Smoking and tobacco actually increase sensitivity of your nervous system. We have alcohol that also does anything that's super inflammatory. There is a little bit of research with inflammatory foods and how that can actually make our pain. They're not pain receptors, they're called nociceptors, but it makes them more sensitive. So they're more likely to have signals sent up that get interpreted as pain. We have the idea of just being in a stressful situation. That's going to upregulate your nervous system. Chronically being in a low grade of stressful situations, maybe they're not extreme in your face situations. Having a prolonged negative outlook on things is also going to be upregulatory. It does not create a sense of safety in our bodies. And things like loud noises can be very upregulatory. I am very sensitive to noises personally, and I know this about myself now that I've paid a lot of attention to that. Different people have different tolerances and abilities to just not notice them, but for me, loud noises are super sensitizing for my body. So I will have to watch those and make sure that I am managing those throughout my day and week. Now, on the contrary, we have downregulators. Downregulators are things that are going to bring us into a more of a parasympathetic state and make us like way more chill. Those are going to be things like general mindfulness, just being present and paying attention to your physical senses in the world around you. This can just mean like spending extra time on the way that something feels or the way that something looks or the sounds of the birds around you when you're walking. Those little like mindfulness things can be really down regulating in getting you to be super present. So that is one of those, like, everybody talks about being mindful, but there's a reason. Like, it's a cliche a little bit, but there's a reason for that. Other things are going to be like slow breathing, like just slowing and connecting with your breath can be very helpful, especially if you are really focusing on a prolonged exhale. Longer exhales are going to pull you over into that parasympathetic state. Being in nature is another example of something that can be very parasympathetic. Spending time with somebody that you really love that makes you feel safe, again, is another parasympathetic activity. General, just focusing on relaxation and full presence. Again, meditation's a great example of that. Those are very down regulatory. A lot of yoga is actually very down regulatory, and a lot of benefits of yoga or a big part of the benefits of yoga are bringing you into a more parasympathetic state. And yoga is very great at getting you to be present, be here and now. There's a lot of great benefits from yoga in that sense. And so it's very down regulatory. Now, not all of the way that yoga is now or the classes that you take are going to be that way, but a lot of the practices are. And things like stretching or foam rolling and massage are all down regulatory. So a lot of the benefits of those three things can be viewed as bringing you into a more of a calm state. So I'm not the first person to hate on foam rolling. There are better ways to spend your time, because there are a lot of other things I listed that can make you more parasympathetic while also achieving other things. Stretching can be parasympathetic if you approach it in a way of, I'm not going to push through at an 8 or 9 intensity and destroy myself and I'm sweating in it. If you feel like you're sweating and your heart rate is racing in a stretch, you are pushing the intensity too much, and that's not going to give you more range of motion or get you better results faster. In fact, it's quite the opposite, because a lot of times in stretching, we want to convince the nervous system to give us more range of motion. So I usually cue a lot of slow breathing and connected breaths during our stretches to kind of use them to calm us down, which is why when I have patients who need to stretch, I will have them do some of their stretches or recommend stretches before bed, because it can get you in that parasympathetic state. Massage is the same way. A lot of hands-on massages can be very parasympathetic. Now, if you're going for like this deep tissue, like no pain, no gain type of massage, which by the way, questionable as to whether or not that's actually doing anything, what it really is doing is activating your sympathetic nervous system. You're probably better off getting a really calm, relaxing massage, because you're not breaking up knots, or those things are not happening. We're not breaking up scar tissue with our hands. So the benefits of massage are like it being really parasympathetic. So make sure that you are in a parasympathetic state when you're getting massage or getting body work done. Cars are also a really great way to bring yourself down into a calm state. Now, it all depends on how you do them. If you're approaching them with like a lot of intensity, irradiation, and you're squeezing for every last drop, that's not going to be very parasympathetic. That's actually how I normally cue people to do them when they are getting ready for a workout. Instead, when you are doing cars for like a calm rest and digest type of thing, it's going to be, I'm going to cue you to do them very mindfully, very slow. Pay attention to what you're feeling. I may even have you close your eyes, and we're just going to not create any tension. You're just going to slowly move through the movements, and it's going to feel way better and more relaxing, I should say. It's just a different sensation. Not that one's better or the other, but this can be how I work with people who might have a lot of tension in their bodies and need to learn how to relax. So those are some of the things. This is not a conclusive list by any means of things that upregulate and downregulate your nervous system. You are going to have a different list than other people because you have a different life experience. These are just general things that we know typically, but some people find certain things work really well for them and some things don't as much. So really, it's important for you to know what really downregulates you and upregulates you and how you can address those things. So that's kind of why I said to pay attention to how often you feel tension in your body, because that's how often you are getting a sympathetic nervous system spike. And on the contrary, you can pay attention to how often you feel like totally relaxed. For most of us, it's almost never. And that was a very light bulb moment for me over the years was, wow, I have never really totally felt relaxed. Turns out relaxing is a skill that you actually have to practice regularly. That was never mimicked in my life growing up. In fact, if we weren't relaxing, it was almost like, what are we doing? We're going to get yelled at. We need to figure out what we should be doing. It was just kind of like there was always commotion. And that is a product of like what my parents learned before them and their parents probably before them. So it's important to kind of pay attention like, oh, this was not modeled for me. So this is going to be my default, is to never relax. Before we move into the actual action steps for this podcast, there are some other things that can affect your pain threshold. So when I talk about being upregulated, we talk about the threshold for pain. Anything below, you're not going to feel pain. Anything above, you're going to feel pain. The threshold is not this like known position or place. It's very much like variable, and it depends on all the things in our lives. So again, some of the things that I mentioned that tend to upregulate you are going to lower that threshold, make it easier for you to feel pain. Some things that are very downregulatory are going to increase that threshold and make it harder or make it take more force or more things before you would experience pain. There are other things that can affect that pain threshold. Things like movement. Pain-free movement in general is going to really downregulate your nervous system. The movement at the area, so like if I had some sort of knee pain, movement of my knee is going to affect my knee locally, but general exercise is going to affect my entire nervous system centrally. So both pain-free movement in a global sense, like exercise, and then very specific movement to the area that is painful, especially if it's been chronic pain, are both going to really create some benefits, different benefits, but similar in adjusting the pain threshold. So this is why I always tell people, if you have chronic issues, well, one of the reasons, if you have chronic issues, start with cars and make sure they're pain-free. If you are doing cars in the way that you should and they're pain-free, then we should be able to downregulate that nervous system just a little bit and maybe increase your pain threshold, and it'll start to feel better. Not to mention, cars are like the minimum of maintaining your range of motion, so we can't really build on better joint mobility if we aren't already working on maintaining what we have. So that's that little brief bit about cars. But other things that can affect your pain threshold is going to be strength training. So yeah, I said exercise, but specifically adding like targeted load to the area is going to be beneficial. It just has to be pain-free. And if you're a clinician, sometimes I will push into pain. It's really very specific to the person, and only if they've been in pain for a long time. And I think it's more of a pain threshold problem than an actual, like, we are creating any sort of increased tissue problem. So that takes a clinical guidance to be able to figure out. But if you don't have pain when you are doing the strength training and you're loading that area that is typically painful, that is a great way to increase the pain threshold, make it harder to feel pain. In general, if you are actively participating in a strength training program, you're going to feel less pain as well because it increases our pain threshold. So that is why strength training, one of the reasons that I love strength training and one of the things that it can help you with is just overall, well, you'll experience less pain than somebody who is not strength training. You'll also experience less injuries because strength training is one of the known ways that we can mitigate injuries. Last but not least, sleep. I'm going to briefly touch on this. I'm not a sleep expert, but what I do know is when we do not sleep as much or we don't have as good of quality of sleep, our pain threshold lowers. And there's a study, and I don't remember any of the details other than they took people's fingers in different temperatures of water. The temperatures increased in their temperature. Or the water increased in temperature as they went. So they did that with people on a normal amount of sleep. I want to say it was like greater than 7 hours. And then they had them sleep less than 5. And they did the exact same cups of water with the same temperature. And when they had less sleep, the participants experienced higher rates of pain at the same temperature, and some of the temperatures that they were touching that they didn't have pain before, they experienced pain in. So now not only is there increased pain at the same exact stimulus or exposure of the temperature, but now there's also going to be pain when they are being exposed to a temperature they didn't have pain with before. Wow, the words there. Sorry about that. Hopefully you didn't get too lost. But essentially, your pain threshold gets lower. So it's easier for you to feel pain. You're going to experience more pain than you would at the same degree of like threat or temperature as this example, but you can experience pain with pressure, anything like that. So this is a really good example of how important it is to make sure we are sleeping, because that every night is kind of like resetting some of our nervous system, which makes us feel a little bit more safe. And there's a lot of things that happen. I'm not going to go through them, but it really helps to manage your pain thresholds and keep them very high or higher than if we were to not sleep well or not sleep enough in general. Quality and quantity both matter. We're going to experience more pain. So sometimes when I work with people who've been in chronic pain, yes, there are almost always some movement related things we can fix and address, but more often than not, the majority of their issues stem from a lack of consistent quality sleep and a lot of these stress things that are going on in their lives. So one of the ways that I like to explain overall stress throughout the day is the cup analogy. So if you think about a cup all day long, if we are thinking about the cup spilling over, that's your threshold for pain. If we think about all of the upregulating things that we do throughout the day, it's kind of like pouring water into that cup. All day long, we are pouring water into the cup. At night, we are emptying that water out when we sleep well, right? And any other down-regulatory activities, we are emptying that water out. If we spend all day and some of the night in stress because we don't sleep well, we're not getting enough sleep, or just all day we never do anything to down-regulate, that water is going to be brimming at the edges, like spilling over all the time. And we are just chronically stressed, and it's going to be way easier for us to feel pain. We're at our thresholds all the time. And we're also going to be more likely to be emotionally reactive and all of those other things, which I'm not going to talk about or get it super into because that's beyond my expertise. But those things matter. And it's no wonder that they happen because we are not working to down-regulate ourselves and bring ourselves into a more calm state. Now, if you think about the opposite happening every time you get exposed to something that's very stressful, if you have a small little coping mechanism or a small little action that you can do to pour some of that water out, you're maintaining it, you're keeping it balanced, or you're just giving yourself a little bit of a buffer so that you have a more room between how much water is in the cup and the edge or the threshold. And that's kind of where I want to get you to in giving you some of these action steps in this next part of the podcast. So really think about that as we move into the things that I want you to, the homework assignments that I'm going to give you, or the couple of things, the steps that you can go through in kind of reassessing your life and thinking, okay, where can I do better in this way? Because guess what? We all can. And I'm sitting here writing this podcast like, wow, yeah, I can definitely do this. So I even benefited from creating this for you. So hopefully you'll benefit from it in listening to it. So step number one is really just creating some awareness. You can't fix a problem that you aren't aware of or don't know exists. And that's what this podcast is doing. And that's what homework number one was helping you do. Number one, or the first thing in that awareness step, is just paying attention to how often you are tense. Like, how often are you experiencing those physical manifestations? It's going to help you get connected with your body a little bit. And a lot of people don't know when they feel stressed. Like, we don't know how to recognize emotions. So this is kind of one of those ways to recognize, wow, I didn't realize I was so stressed when I do this thing, or I didn't realize just how often I was so stressed, or I didn't realize every time I talk to this one person, I'm really stressed. So the first thing is just realizing how often it's happening. And then the second thing is starting to look at that on a deeper level. Are there some patterns that I can pay attention to? Are there certain times where this happens more than others? And maybe why are they happening? So start to notice themes around those things. That would be like a secondary level to this. Number one is just pay attention to how often it's happening. Number two is kind of unpack a little bit about why they're happening. And that might require you to go work with a therapist, a mental health therapist, to kind of begin to understand some of this stuff, because again, that's beyond my expertise. But a lot of us can do a lot of good work just being a little bit more aware. So that's the first thing. The second thing in awareness is to zoom out really far. So I love the zooming in and zooming out. If you listen to, I think, podcast number 1, we talked about that, but zooming really far out and looking at the big picture of all of your habits. I want you to create, this is where that homework piece comes in. I want you to create a list, and I want you to put on one side upregulatory activities, and on the other side, I want you to draw a line in the middle. I want you to put down regulatory activities. So on the left side, and go through like a normal day for yourself, what things are you doing that are upregulatory? You can go back to that part of the podcast where I was listing those, or just think about things that typically kind of stress you out or make you feel more sensitized. You might not know that yet, by the way. This is all stepwise fashion, but I want you to just kind of list what you know. Then on the other side, I want you to go through the same day and list what you do that's down regulatory. How often are you doing these things? And be realistic. Maybe you need to go through again and listen to what I said, but I want you to list those. And then I want you to look at your day and look at how often the left side is filling your cup and the right side is doing nothing to empty it out. Most of us, again, are walking around with overflowing cups all the time, that it's no wonder that we experience these chronic pain episodes and we're just like always flared up or feel like, wow, I just feel like I keep having this low back pain that keeps coming up, or my neck just always feels tight. Well, now we can understand why your neck always feels tight, because there's not a single thing on the right side of your list, or the balance is just not there. And it's never going to be perfectly balanced. We don't live lives that are conducive to that, but that doesn't mean we can't make things better than they are now. And really, that's the ultimate goal of everything, isn't it? It's any little improvement is worth the effort. So step number 2 is going to be action. The first thing is just going to be adjusting like your comparison between the upregulating and downregulating activities by removing something that's very upregulating. And I know removing can be kind of hard, but this is just getting rid of a habit or not doing it or replacing it with something else. So the first thing is just looking at, okay, for example, maybe you're somebody who has 2 or 3 cups of coffee on a regular basis, and one of those cups of coffee is like after 12 p.m. Maybe you could turn that into decaf, because it's not going to have any caffeine in it. And now not only are you removing one of those times when you are upregulating your nervous system, but now you're also not having caffeine late, which is getting you to have crappy sleep, which is then making you more tired, sensitizing your nervous system even more, and then you're going to need more caffeine the next day. So it's that vicious cycle. So one of the things that I'll do, and you can do this like, I'll just cycle through this in my life. Sometimes I feel like I'll start to drink like too much coffee, or I'll be doing too much caffeine again, and I'll just switch to decaf. I'll allow myself 1 cup of coffee for the day, but I'll switch to decaf. In PT school, I actually took an entire week off of coffee and all caffeine, because I was having way too much of it. I had heart palpitations, I was having anxiety attacks, and PT school was a very stressful time for me, because a lot of my own life habits were very much not conducive to the things that I'm telling you. So I had a lot of things on the left hand side of my chart, and I had almost nothing on my right hand side, which again is partially because that was never mirrored for me, and then I never learned it, because where would I have learned it from? And here we are, I'm teaching you about it, because it turned out it was a very, very, very important part of tackling my chronic neck pain that I had. Oh my gosh, I had Ryan, my husband, rubbing my neck, trying to quote unquote like rub out the knots in my shoulder blades. It was very miserable. And besides neck cars, because there was a time when I could barely even do a full neck car, it got so bad, learning how to downregulate was like one of the biggest things for me. And I'll tell you the specific type of activity that I did, but back to removing something, I had to take a whole week away from caffeine. So you might not need to do something so extreme. It might be something as simple as just removing 1 cup a day and allowing yourself 2, or maybe having a cutoff time. One of my favorite things is a cutoff time. It's 12 p.m. is my soft cutoff time, and 1 p.m. for me is my like hard cutoff time. I will surpass that on occasion, but I know the risk that I'm doing, and I know the cost that that's going to have. So make sure that you're actively choosing this, and pay attention to that. So the first thing is just removing something. The second thing is going to be adding something, and we're thinking about balancing those 2 sides of your list. So again, if we're going to make sure that we're bringing ourselves into more of a parasympathetic state, then we might want to add more parasympathetic activities, and that can be hard in and of itself. I understand most people need to do a combination of removing and adding. So we need to kind of work on both, doing a little bit less of that, whatever is upregulating them to an extent. You can't just quit your job. So if your job is stressful, it might need to be something else that you do, but we can add in some mindfulness and some breath work, which is my 2 favorite ways of addressing this with the people that I personally work with. Now, the goal, remember, overall is to empty the cup out as much as we can. So ultimately, when I work with people, I will have them do this type of activity. We'll kind of look at these things, and we will talk about the things that will provide them with the biggest ROI for their time, return on investment for their time, effort, and energy. And I will try to work on that with them. But overall, we are trying to kind of adjust habits. And then I'm also most of the time going to recommend that they have a regular down regulation practice every single night before bed. Again, this is going to do two things. One, it's going to get a big amount of emptying of the cup, if we're going to use that analogy. But two, it's going to be a regular emptying of the cup, right? So everything is dynamic. The life is dynamic. We're constantly having ebbs and flows. We're constantly being upregulated, downregulated. But if we have something that can be really consistent practice, not only is that going to be consistently downregulating every single day, but also relaxation and downregulation is a skill. It is something that you are not going to be good at if you never have practiced it. And that was the reason that I never did it or wasn't consistent for a very long time, is because I wasn't good at it. I didn't feel relaxed when I would do it. Your goal for when you first start to do this is not to feel relaxed. It's to stay consistent. It's literally like consistency. There are ways to make sure that your effort is better, but as you build time over for several months of practicing some of the downregulation skills, your effort will not need to be as high to get better results. So you'll put in the same amount of time, but you will get more return on investment because you'll be better at it. So not only are you going to practice this, but then usually I'll tell people, okay, so every night, for example, we're going to lay down, we're going to work on breathing. I'll talk about breathing in a minute, but we're always going to work on breathing. I'm going to give them breath work. And then on top of that, I want them to be mindful of their breathing throughout the day. And maybe just one or two breaths we're going to try to get of a very down regulatory breath, but that's it. And if we're practicing our breathing every single night, then eventually we're going to get better at it. So then when we are doing these 1 to 2 breaths throughout the day, they're going to be more effective. So you want to practice to get better at the skill so that when you're actually doing the skill, it's more effective down the road. So unfortunately, there's always going to be this really big hump we have to get over of you're doing a lot of work and you're not getting any return on investment for your effort. And believe me, I know how frustrating that is. That it's been that way for almost everything I've ever wanted to do in my life. But eventually you'll start to get those small little wins and it'll be super helpful. The reason I like doing down regulation right before bed is because, again, we want to really get good sleep. Sleep is it's my lifeline, but it really is all of our lifelines. And if you don't sleep well, or you think you might sleep okay, or you get enough sleep, but you don't know how the quality is, you can pretty much know that you will improve your quality of sleep if you can downregulate and get yourself into a very calm parasympathetic state right before bed. So the breath work is always what I give people. Now, the reason that I usually choose breath work as the intro is because one, it's one of the simplest ways to really pull. It's what's the word I'm looking for? A very prominent way for us to pull ourselves into a parasympathetic. It's I would say biggest dial turner in bringing us into parasympathetic activity that we can do almost anywhere. And once we get better at it, it's not only going to improve our ability to downregulate, but it's going to improve all kinds of other things. And the way that I normally coach it is going to be the basics and the foundation for the way that I teach breathing for core stability. So it's kind of setting the scene for a lot of other things. So we always want to make sure, not always, but I like to make sure, since we all have limited time, that the people I work with, they start on the basics, and then we are starting on things that are going to accomplish multiple things rather than only temporarily make them feel good at the time. I really like to address on root causes and things that build on each other, and breath work is one of those things. And the way that I normally coach this is, number one, we just want to pay attention to how comfortable you are. So we find a position that's comfortable. For most people, it's going to be on their backs, head supported, knees up on some sort of a bench or the couch or the bed, and you are relaxed. And so for a lot of people, I have to get them relaxed first. And this is a skill. And I know the people who struggle with relaxation because I'll assess them and they're squeezing everything, trying to help me move. And I will ask them to relax, and they will not listen, or they will try to. I shouldn't say they won't listen. Everybody tries to, but the people who really need to work on relaxing are not super great at it. And so then I'll have to do things say things like play dead. And finally I'll get the leg. I'll be I want your leg heavy in my hand, all of those things. And those are the people who are going to have to work on a little bit of relaxation first. So I will teach them to do like a body scan. So we'll start at the head, we'll go down our face, into our shoulders, into our neck, trying to actively feel the muscles relax. Feel them, relax them. And I have them go down and we just do the full body head to toe relaxation. And we go through that. And then we just work on breath work. And to start, most people just need to pay attention to whether their mouth is open or not. We want closed mouth nasal breathing. It's more connected to your diaphragm, and mouth breathing is more of your sympathetic type of breathing pattern that we want to avoid when we are doing parasympathetic relaxation breathing. So you're going to start to pay attention to your breath going in through your nose. Most people, when they're breathing in, they will feel their chest lift towards their face and shoulders come to their ears, and maybe their back will lift and arch up. That is going to be more of your sympathetic nervous system breathing. If you are laying relaxed on the floor, you should not be doing your sympathetic nervous system strategy breathing. You should really be breathing very like relaxed, which is going to look like your nose breathing in through your nose, filling your abdomen and sides and your back with air. And your chest might lift a little because your lungs are there, but your rib cage should not flare up towards the ceiling. That's what we are looking for. And for majority of people, that's where I have to start for a decent amount of time, because getting your breath out of your neck and into your like abdomen and just focusing on feeling that instead of like gasping for air all the time and then slowing that down into a really slow exhale, like double the exhale, double the amount of time spent in the exhale and pausing. That is already going to be a challenge. So once people get the hang of that, then that type of breath work is what I tell them to work on throughout the day. So I will have them do some parasympathetic breathing at night for 5 or 10 minutes, maybe even just 10 breaths, right? You got to start where you are to build that habit. But then I will also tell them now throughout the day, anytime you feel stressed, or maybe anytime you go to the bathroom, if you work a job like I worked, where I was just back to back with patients all day long. And when I was first learning this stuff, it was almost impossible for me to just like downregulate when I was around other people. I had to be like in a very calm, quiet place. So I would actually practice this every time I went to the bathroom. So I would pee and I would do a couple of really slow, like, I don't like the word diaphragmatic breathing because all of our breath is diaphragmatic breathing, but this slow parasympathetic breathing. And I would do that, and that would be how I would build my habit. So at work or wherever you are that you tend to feel really a lot of tension, or throughout the day, just practicing, like when you're driving in your car, you can practice at a stoplight. And it doesn't need to be like every single breath needs to be this. It needs to be 1 to 2. Just get a couple breaths in whenever you think about it, and just think about it as reps or ways of you to just pour out a little bit of water throughout the day to downregulate yourself and feel a little bit more calm and relaxed. Now, times you don't want to be practicing this is before a workout. By the way, remember back in the beginning of this podcast, I said stress is still beneficial, and the sympathetic nervous system is not your energy. It's your inability to get into a parasympathetic state. So if you're going to go work out, you don't want to do these nice, easy, low-level cars and some stretching and foam rolling. You want to get yourself jacked and ready to go, because that's what exercise is. So it's always important to know that all tools are important at certain times, and they're not the answer for every single thing. You don't want to do this type of breath work right before a workout. You want to do this as a down regulation. So this is great to do after a workout. And every single kin stretch class that we have that are the longer classes, we do this type of breath work. We always end with calming, bring yourself back into a parasympathetic state. So that is the way that I normally have people work on their down regulation. I will always go through habits with them. We'll talk about things they can cut out. And then the way that we start to add things in is adding some breath work during the day or at night, especially right before bed, being mindful of their breaths and trying to get 1 to 2 of them in whenever they think about it, especially if they go through a stressful time. And last but not least, not doing this before a workout, knowing when this is important for our lives. So those are going to be the simplest things that you can do throughout the day. Last thing is just the awareness, right? So I said I mentioned the awareness, and then we got into the action steps, but the awareness really matters in recognizing the things in your life that are really upregulating for you. And sometimes it's a matter of like making some big life adjustments. And again, that's where finding a therapist and working with a mental health therapist can be really helpful. But sometimes it's not. Sometimes it can be just paying attention and being like, wow, I just didn't realize that. And then simply just relaxing and bringing that to your awareness can be super helpful. So don't underestimate just the simple things you can do on a regular basis, because habits really do add up. If you look back at your list that you made, you can see all of the small things that you do that are upregulatory that you may not have noticed or thought about before, but because they're so small, but they're so repetitive and so consistent in your life that they are all contributing. And that's what I really want to highlight and want you to pay attention to in these last 2 episodes, and obviously from beyond here. So to summarize everything, number 1, stress is not bad. Safety and downregulating is our goal so that we can learn to manage life stressors in our lives, because they're always going to happen. We just want to make sure we know how to recover and downregulate. We covered 2 steps in creating habits that are going to help you manage your stress. So we want to make sure that we have some awareness, and then we want to actually take some action steps in addressing those things and making sure we're balancing those upregulating habits and downregulating habits. And then we covered the cup analogy. So every time you're doing some of that breath work, think about emptying your cup. And last but not least, I covered breathing as the simplest downregulator, which I really think it's highly underutilized and underappreciated is the word I was looking for. Yeah. So very underutilized and underappreciated and underrated, honestly. And you get really serious about breath work. There's a lot of things that you can do to build upon that habit. But here today, I just want you to start a habit of being aware of your breath and starting to work on those things. So hopefully you learned some things and really enjoyed this podcast. If there's anything that you specifically loved or you have questions, feel free to email me, jen@movementupgraded.com. If you haven't left a review already, go do that. It's super helpful for me and for anybody who might be interested in learning all of these things, and or share the podcast with somebody who you think would benefit from this information. With that being said, I will catch you in podcast episode number 8.